Hey everybody, Ty here. I hope everyone is doing well. We're going back over what has now become a day 5 slight risk here. I put up a short yesterday discussing some of my thoughts on this setup as it stands right now. There hasn't been a whole lot of change since then. If anything, the models are starting to become a little bit more concrete with the severe weather threat, and I'm seeing a slight trend to the south, if anything. I would say at this point for Saturday, at this juncture, all hazards are still in play, including a threat for maybe a couple of tornadoes. But it's still the timing that I'm trying to figure out because the models aren't really in full agreement at this point. So we're kind of in an interesting situation in regards to that. So if we were to go ahead and pull up the GFS and the Euro here, if I can get it to pop up, there we go. One thing that you'll notice, and I'll move both of these forward as efficiently as I can, is of course we have our main trough here and we have a ridge that's out ahead of it. But this actually now has evolved to become a situation where this is not going to be the leading feature. This is going to end up pushing further off towards the north, and then a new trough now develops over towards Texas, and this will be the feature that increases the severe weather potential. So I didn't have the timing perfect with this one, but if I were to go back a little bit and I were to try to get into Saturday afternoon, we have the tale of two models here again. So we're, like I said, this has pretty much been been the story of this storm system. The same old song and dance, I would say at this point. We have the GFS, which is showing a better solution a little bit further towards maybe Dixie Alley and areas a little further off towards the south. Southern Oklahoma, maybe central Texas even could be a point of interest. Also Arkansas and Louisiana later into the evening. Whereas with this one, we're looking at a much messier setup, much messier mode, and potentially maybe even a lack of severe weather. There still might be a linear mode with this, but it's not quite as intense. Now, from the video that I put up a couple days earlier, it's interesting because the Euro was the more aggressive model out of the two, and now we've kind of flip-flopped a little bit. It's not uncommon to see this, but this just kind of goes to show why severe weather can be sometimes a real hassle to try to forecast, especially considering that we're in the second season, which is generally just harder to forecast. So, really interesting situation. And then also we're keeping an eye on these subsequent troughs to go with it, because I do think there will be multiple days after this event that will be subsequent that will have severe weather potential as well. You can see a pretty stout trough coming into play. We have to watch the northeast by the end of the weekend, and then we have multiple troughs coming on after this point here. Really, we're going to be putting a lot more emphasis, of course, on this weekend's severe weather threat, but I see at least maybe 2 or 3 more opportunities before all is said and done. I would say the most notable will probably be later towards maybe next week at this point, but time frame is still to be determined with that, of course. And then if we were to look further along on the GFS here, things look like it gets really aggressive right towards the end of the month and maybe even towards the beginning of November. Obviously, the jury's still kind of out on that. But like I said, there's a lot that we're going to be keeping an eye on here. But for now, we're going to really hone in more or less on this weekend setup, particularly with Saturday. I think Sunday is not going to quite be as intriguing because it looks like the trough already starts to deteriorate just about as quickly as it really develops. So, again, really interesting situation with the way that this trough ultimately kind of forms up and basically kind of withers away. Now, one thing I will say with the Euro scenario is the Euro kind of leans a little bit more into Sunday, just a little bit. But even at this point, the trough is still not quite as stout as what we would see more so on Saturday. So trough evolution at this point is going to be another key factor with this as well. Obviously, we know the deal with the GFS scenario. The GFS really seems to favor more of a Saturday type deal, where severe weather will be more likely across the southern states, Gulf states maybe even at this point. Now, what we're doing with this map here in particular also, I want to make sure I'm emphasizing it, making the point clear, is that we're looking at the mid-levels of the atmosphere to try to get a better idea of where our short waves are going to develop. And one thing that I've noticed here is there's 2 short waves. There is the shortwave trough itself that develops over here towards Texas, And then we have a couple of short waves that just develop in general over towards Louisiana. I'm this is where things really kind of get complicated here because I'm not sure which one I would latch on to at this point. If you were to be a storm chaser, you would have honestly have two options here. I would kind of lean over towards Louisiana at this point, but it's a little bit hard to say it. I think forcing is going to be a little bit weaker towards the mid levels with this one. If you're looking for more definite storm activity as a whole, you would look towards Texas. But I think in regards to the more significant severe threat, if there is to be any, it will be over here. And obviously, if we were to go back on the Euro, this doesn't really have that same kind of intensity to it. There is a short wave that pops up here, but it's a little bit further towards the north. It's a little bit weaker. The winds don't really match up quite as well. It's not as impressive of an angle here either. So, like I said, this is one of those forecasting situations where we're really probably not going to know until about the final day, if not maybe even the day of, because we just can't seem to really get any degree of model agreement between the two models here. And these are two of the best models, by the way, that I'm looking at here. The GFS and the Euro have been very consistent over the years when it comes to severe weather, and I trust them pretty well, I would say. Also, with the slower development, if we were to go ahead and take a look at Sunday, GFS would favor more of a mid-Atlantic, maybe Carolina type of thunderstorm, maybe even severe weather threat with that one. But at this point, I would say that things just aren't quite as stout as I would want them to be in regards to anything of major significance right now. Whereas with the Euro and its slower development, if we were to go into the following day, it looks like more of a southeastern type of threat. And then by the time we get towards the overnight hours, then we're looking more so at maybe a thunderstorm threat for the Carolinas and maybe the mid-Atlantic. Originally, when I was looking at this a couple of days earlier, I also want to make sure that I don't leave out the Ohio Valley here. If we were to go back, and we're going to use the Euro first in this case, I was thinking that maybe the Midwest would be a point of interest along with the Ohio Valley, but it seems like we're slowly but surely trending away from that. The timing is still variable at this point, but now we could be looking at a Saturday night, early Sunday morning type of thunderstorm threat with increased wind potential. But really at this point, I'm not sure if I'm able to latch on to a more significant mode coming into play here. Now, with the GFS scenario, this pretty much ends up kind of bowing out to be the same thing at this point. Maybe a more stout, again, like I said, kind of leaning into a more stout mode, maybe popping up over towards the northeast and maybe the mid-Atlantic states. But I would say across the board, though, the threat really looks like it's kind of shifted again towards the Mississippi River Basin now. Not so much hanging around the Midwest like I originally was thinking. Now, I still want to keep an eye on the Tennessee Valley as well, but I think we're kind of trending a little bit away from that also. Euro's kind of trended a little bit further to the south too, so I really think these next 36 hours of model runs here is going to be essential to getting a better idea of what to expect, especially as the storm system continues to develop. Also, some other key factors that we're going to be looking at, of course, is the moisture here. So we're going to, of course, move the GFS troughing here. We brought the 500 millibar back up here on the lower end of the screen. And we're going to compare this with the Euro, but I want to do a combination deal here where we're looking at the troughing that's occurred over here towards southern Texas here. And I want to combine this with the moisture that we have available, because the way that these two components could interact with each other could make or break the day in regards to severe weather potential. Now, you do see with the troughing that we have, we do get something that pops out ahead of that. And the moisture, or the amount of moisture that's available over here, is most abundant over towards Louisiana. So we could get good storm development here, but I also think with the lack of forcing, and this is why I wasn't sure about this area, I think we end up getting a messier storm mode with this. We would probably get a slightly cleaner storm mode with the Texas wave that pops up here. However, moisture seems to run out pretty quickly and pretty early too. So this is also kind of why I have my doubts with that. We do get a little bit of a reinforcing shot by the time we get later into the evening. So the other key factor that we're going to be looking for is, of course, instability as we go on from that point. Now let's make a comparison here with the euro, and we're going to move this forward around the same time frame here. We're going to be looking at Saturday afternoon into Saturday evening. Now the moisture looks about the same, but remember the troughing is a little bit different with this one. So this is us looking around the same time frame. Trough hasn't quite arrived over here. I would say that the moisture is actually out ahead of it pretty considerably, I would say. But I think again we kind of run into the same issue. Forcing isn't quite there. The storms kind of fire off a little bit later into the evening as well. This does kind of favor a little bit more of a Sunday setup, like I mentioned before. We'll kind of sneak forward and take a look at that. You can see that our jet streak is starting to get towards the apex of this trough here, or towards the deepest part of the trough here. So it's evolving and kind of ramping up as we go forward throughout the day. But if we can get this to hold together, again, I'm a little bit more intrigued with a threat maybe starting to merge over here towards maybe the Appalachians here, the southern Appalachians, before all is said and done. But again, like I said, what we're seeing on the euro, we don't really see it on the GFS. So really irritating situation kind of coming into play here. So let's go ahead and also take a look at a couple of severe parameters here. We're not going to get too in depth. We're going to really just take a look more or less at our instability that's available. That's going to be, of course, another key factor. During this time of year, we tend to have a little bit less to go around. But even so, it does look like we get into that 1,000+ joule per kilogram number easily. Some areas we're getting closer towards 2,000. Now, the key factor in all this is how does this match up with the timing in which storms would initiate? And that's going to be the other key variable here. It looks like everything still tries to come together, but I think ultimately the storm mode might be the key determining factor here. Probably by the time we get into tomorrow, we'll start to take a closer look at those low level winds at this point. Like I said, I'm really kind of on the fence about this one with all the model disagreement. It could literally be just a messy little crapshoot of a day, or it could be a pretty notable one. You can never tell with these second season setups. It's really more of a nowcast situation, even more so than what you would see during early springtime and maybe even into summer. But severe weather season definitely looks like it is back in business here for sure. Now, one thing that I am going to do here, I'm going to switch over to the GFS and get a look at our surface cape really quickly. You can see that we still have some pretty good numbers here. One reason I didn't go over to the euro for surface cape is because, well, we don't really have that parameter here. So we actually have to switch in between models to get that. So by looking at Saturday, that's a pretty good idea of what we have to expect. Just a rough estimate here. We still have plenty of instability available. In a lot of cases, I would say that we're sitting right at about 2,000, maybe in 2,500 joules per kilogram, which at this point could still even ultimately include parts of Arkansas, Oklahoma, and maybe even into southern Missouri as well. So multiple areas we'll need to watch. We're going to really need to be watching that lower level wind profile as we go forward. Even if we don't have the most impressive low level jet, it still will be more than sufficient enough to cause greater problems here. Now, either one of these scenarios where we have the trough beginning to deepen here, it only amplifies our severe weather threat at this point. So like I said, it's kind of a touch and go situation at this point. Like I said, probably by tomorrow we'll make further updates on this, but I'm really intrigued as to what we might get as we go further along. Again, as we look at the mix layer for the following day, as we get towards Sunday, notice a little bit less in the way of energy available. We're looking more maybe towards the Gulf Coast states and maybe towards the maybe towards the Carolinas. But again, tale of two models doesn't really help our case here. So let's go ahead now and take a final look at what our precip forecast could be on this. Now, what I want you to really pay close attention to is really just over towards this region. We've talked about this other stuff in the last video, and not much has really changed there. More mountain snow to be expected. Nothing too far out of the norm there. Now, here is where things start to get more interesting. This is getting towards the 18th. This is our severe weather setup. Let's see a linear mode in both cases here. I would expect the storm mode to be kind of messy, so supercells might be on the lower end in regards to numbers. But if we were to keep things rolling here, I'm going to backtrack with this if I can. Nope, won't let me do it that way. I'm going to pause both of these. I landed them on a good hour for pretty much both of them. It looks like peak storm initiation occurs later into the afternoon with both of these. Somewhere between, I would say, 6 p.m. Central Time is when things start to really pick up. And it maintains into the overnight hours, but we start to lose a little bit of steam as we go further along. And then, of course, we still have to watch for the following day. Both scenarios for Sunday, I would say, also kind of favor the mid-Atlantic and the southern to northern Appalachia. And then as we go further beyond here, the storms really start to lose steam, and then we're watching the storm system exit at this point. So Sunday, I do think, could have the potential to go up to a slight risk. As far as Saturday, that one, I'm thinking more so Texas, Louisiana, maybe Arkansas and Oklahoma as well. Kind of uncertain at this point, not really sold on Missouri just yet. Illinois, looks like you might get spared as of right now based off of model data, but still keep an eye on it. I wouldn't be surprised to see you in a marginal risk. But that being said here, given what we have available to us, I will catch you later in the next one, and we will get a little bit more in depth with each video leading up to the event. If things get more significant, you'll hear it first here. But everybody have a wonderful night. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.